my ups and downs with personal discernment. So one of the first major decisions I had to make when I was really trying to discern carefully the Lord's will was related to ministry. I was active in youth ministry at St. Mary's, and things were really taking off. And I wasn't going to have enough time, just in my own free time, to keep up with it. And the contract I was working on was starting to wind down, and I wasn't really needed, full time. So I wanted to go down to halftime, but here I was thinking in the process, like, it's just not good for my career to do this. It's not very strategic. I should be trying to work full time to grow my career. And so I'm like, Lord, like, should I really do this? Anyway, around that time, I get a call from a guy who wanted to meet with me. It was a guy that I'd worked with a year previously, and he wanted to meet with me, and he came to offer me a job that would effectively double my salary. And I remember being like so flattered and so honored and all that stuff, but I was so confused because here I am, I'm thinking that maybe I'm to kind of get involved with ministry more, and I'm getting offered this job, but the job was in Montreal. And so I was like, Lord, like, I don't know what you're saying. I'm very, very confused by this. So I thought and I prayed and I thought and I prayed. And then it hit me. It seemed like the Lord was saying, you take care of my work and I will take care of yours. And so I knew this was a sign from God, because I knew he didn't want me to move to Montreal. He wanted me to stay in Ottawa. That just made a lot of sense. Anyway, so then I went ahead and I decided, okay, I'm going to say to my boss and make him a pitch to go down to halftime. Now, when I went to do that, I knew it was going to be a bit of a selling job. I was worried. I thought he'd be like, I don't know. So I had a whole pitch, and I went in and I was all ready to give him the pitch, and I gave him kind of the headline. And before I was to launch into my presentation, he said, great, good idea. I'm like, oh, okay, awesome. So there was an example of the Lord doing a couple things. Number one, speaking through a sign, and then give me the grace to interpret the sign. But this was amazing. Like, I really enjoyed my career, and I was just at the beginning of it. And yet God gave me a desire to do this youth ministry stuff, which I didn't know whether that was going to be a long-term thing or not, and it turned out not to be, the youth piece. But so God speaking A, through desire, and then B, through this sign, and then finally the confirmation of my boss to go ahead and make that move. A major decision I had to make was what my vocation was. At the time I was trying to decide that, I was involved in ministry. And so it just seemed to make sense to me that I needed to be open to the call to the priesthood or to the single life, because I had such a desire to serve God. Now, of course, at that time I also knew that every baptized person needs to be open to religious life, priesthood for men, and maybe the sisterhood for women or the brotherhood for men. Everyone needs to be open to whatever the Lord wants. In my particular case, I felt very convicted that I needed to be open to it. And also because at this time, when I was getting discipled and being in ministry, a religious order was being raised up right in my midst by my spiritual mentor. So I thought, oh, I better give this a serious consideration. And I wasn't particularly drawn to the priesthood. I didn't feel a desire, but I did feel a desire and a call to evangelize. So I thought, maybe I'm just not completely open to God's will. Anyway, I decided that I wouldn't date and that I would just surrender to the Lord, my vocation, and wait for an answer. So I prayed and thought and prayed. And about a year after I surrendered to the Lord, on this one day, I came across in my regular daily Bible reading my favorite verse for marriage, Genesis 2:24. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. And I think I'd always figured, I think part of me always thought that I would, I would get that scripture verse on a day that was relevant. And I remember reading it and it just really struck me. And I was just wondering if anything was special about that day. And of course, that day was my birthday. But what was also striking about it was that it was my 27th birthday. And I'd always thought that I'd be married when I was 27. So I really felt like the Lord was speaking. And I'm not sure exactly if I'd asked for confirmation, but as I'm praying, just the word Deuteronomy came to mind. And I was still early in my Bible reading days. And I thought, I think that's a book in the Bible. I was really struck. I think that's a book in the Bible. I thought maybe I'm supposed to go to that. Again, I was very new at discernment. Anyway, I cut open to Deuteronomy. It took me a while to find it, needed to use the index. And I cut open to Deuteronomy, and my eyes landed on two verses. Get engaged to a woman and plant a vineyard. Now, at this time, vineyard had become a rich symbol for my calling to ministry and potentially full-time ministry. The vineyard had become a symbol of a ministry that was focused on evangelization, but included both the proclamation and the demonstration. So I really felt I had confirmation about my vocation in that moment. And I haven't doubted it since. Just to be, because it's been many years since I received that word, and even in my 60s, I'm still not married. Every 5 or 10 years, I'd be, Lord, did I get that word correctly? And I would go through a bit of a discernment process. And only in the last maybe 10 years has this notion of a vineyard type ministry emerged. And so, it's almost literally, it's somewhere in that range where that kind of ministry has started to emerge in my life, and yet I still haven't been married. Now, at the time I was thinking, to get a word that was so clear about my vocation, I assumed that would happen, it would be imminent. That if God spoke a very clear word, that meant that something would happen soon. And that can absolutely happen, and I've had words like that. But in my particular case, I've learned that maybe one of the reasons why the Lord spoke so clearly is because there would be a timing. And I'm still looking towards that timing. Another major decision was what to do after my time of youth ministry at St. Mary's. It came to a point where I realized that being a parish youth minister wasn't my long-term calling, that I needed to decide and potentially settle into what my long-term career was. And I was really looking at three disparate choices. I was thinking, well, do I return to my tech career? And thinking that I would probably eventually have more of a business role in technology. Do I go and do my MBA? Or I really like to teach. Should I go to teacher's college? Or number three, get a degree in theology. And these were all major, major decisions that I prayed about and thought about and asked the Lord to speak to me. And through all my discernment, I didn't have the slightest clue what God wanted. I didn't have an inkling. They were all very good choices. And then in the end, I just decided to do the theology degree, and just using God's wisdom. I realized that I'll probably be involved in ministry over the longer term. So it'd be really important for me to have the theology degree. For the teaching, I did some supply teaching and realized it wasn't a fit for me. And even if I pursued a tech career, I felt like because I would probably work largely in smaller tech companies, I thought I don't really need an MBA. But there was an example where I didn't have the slightest clue what God wanted, and I felt it was okay just to make the best choice I could. And that decision has borne fruit. Now, I've had many decisions since where I've really felt I've received a clear word, especially in major decisions. But in that major decision, I had no inkling. It was just applying the Lord's wisdom, which is awesome, just doing the pros and cons, weighing it based on God's priorities. The next major decision was joining the ministry I'm with right now, Catholic Christian Outreach. And what's interesting about this story was not only a couple of strong prophetic things, but it was an overlap of two prophetic things. One of the things I've sometimes, one of the things I've learned is when you go to discern, the Lord might be talking about one thing, and he's talking about another thing, and then eventually those two things overlap. So the first thread was when I was in technology, there was a season where I was an executive in a technology company. And then we went through mergers and acquisitions, either getting acquired or acquiring other companies. And I became more of a middle manager, which was great. But I felt all during that time that I would return to an executive level leadership. Just felt like as I prayed and I thought, it just felt this is what God wanted for me. I'd prayed about it, had some interesting signs. And yeah, so that was kind of one prophetic thread. Put that aside for a second. On a separate thread, when I was working my tech career, I used to commute to Germany, northern Germany. And I stayed in this hotel that was attached to this business complex. And one day I was walking to work and I looked at the door that was kind of the main entrance to this complex, the business center and the hotel. And the letters on the door were CCO. And I just kind of laughed to myself. I said, oh, CCO's in Germany now, knowing that they weren't. But as I looked at it, I had kind of one of those Jeremiah 1 experiences. It was like, Chris, what do you see? I'm like, Lord, and I think might have been the first time I had a Jeremiah 1 experience. Lord, I don't know, like I see a door, I see CCO, see door, CCO on a door, door CCO. You will open the door for me at CCO? I'm like, okay, Lord, whatever. Okay, so I just kind of took note of that. Then another occasion, I was walking to work, and across the street from our work was a big sign advertising our company that people could see from the highway that was nearby. And it's a software company, and it showed a guy working on his iPad. And the guy that was on his iPad looked a lot like a senior leader from CCO. And again, I walked by it and I looked up, and it was another one of those Jeremiah 1 experiences, like, Chris, what do you see? I'm like, I see a guy from CCO, and I see my work. CCO, work CCO. I'm going to work for CCO someday? I'm like, okay, this is starting to get weird. Lord, like, if you want me to work for CCO, then they can call me. And then they eventually did. And what was so interesting about that, when they called me, just the week before they called me, I was sitting down with my small community because I try to discern major decisions, not just on my own, but with my spiritual director, if I have one at the time, as well as my small community. And I was saying to them a week before the call, I said, I don't think the Lord's calling me to be a VP, because I was, again, so involved with ministry, and to go back to being a VP, it's pretty hard to do a lot of things on the outside. It's a very demanding job, fun, but demanding. So I don't think that word was from the Lord. And then a week later, I get a call from CCO, and they invite me to take on a VP role, which I would have never anticipated in a million years. And the reason why it was so funny was because it was VP of programming. And so it was like, okay, Lord, yeah, I guess I thought I would have an executive role in programming, but I was more thinking computer programming, but this was ministry programming. And so I've been working with CCO now for several years, and it's been a very good decision. I can absolutely confirm that it was a call from God. Another interesting discernment was I was trying to decide whether to put on a course for men. I wanted to put a course for men on how to hear God. Another interesting discernment story was I was trying to decide whether to put on this course on how to hear God and evangelization and the Holy Spirit. And so at that time, I asked the Lord to give me an image of something that would confirm that I'm called to do that. And so the image that came to mind was actually a memory of when I took driving school lessons. Larry's driving school, so it came to mind. And I'm, praying and thinking about this, thinking, okay, how could this, how could this relate to a call to put on a course on how to hear God? And I'm praying through it. And I remember my spiritual mentor saying, discerning God's will is much like driving a car. If you want to discern God's will, it's easy for God to speak to you as you're moving, not unlike how it's easier to steer a car when it's moving. So I felt okay. And it was Larry's driving school, so it was a course on it was training in that. So I thought maybe that's it. But I was worried that I was just doing this so I could get the answer I wanted. So I said, Lord, I need confirmation. So the next Sunday, the priest is talking about how to hear God. And he's quoting my spiritual mentor, the 7 principles or so from my spiritual mentor. And I thought, this is very, very coincidental. But I was still not 100% sure. And on the Monday after the Sunday, I said, Lord, please confirm this is from you. And then I realized the priest who was giving the homily, his name was Larry. And that was all the confirmation I needed. Now, I was also trying to discern whether the form of the course, like I really felt like it needed to be like a boot camp. But I don't know, I just felt like that maybe this was my idea. So I said, Lord, give me a word. And so literally shortly after that, I literally got one word. A gal in my prayer group who is very, very prophetic, literally got one word. She got a word. I get this word for you. The word is seal, and with capital letters. And so I'm praying and thinking, and then I realize SEAL, Navy SEALs. Yeah, that would point to boot camp. And I go to read up on it, and I was reading about how they first, for the Navy SEALs, they wanted to start first with men and then eventually with women, which was exactly what I wanted to do with my boot camp. And so God confirmed literally through a word to put on this boot camp for men on how to hear God and to evangelize under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit.